Let us now look at a practical application in terms of developing this requisite skill set. Now, just to point out that moving forward from this point, all that we're going to be doing is to get an high-level understanding of what can be done or what is actually required to be done as it relates to each of these required skills. Bearing in mind that there are in-depth courses, documentation provided by established organizations such as ISACA, and the list goes on. If you really want to deep dive into any one of these areas of specialization, but most importantly is that in relation to this course, as I've mentioned earlier, then to really get your hands dirty in terms of owning those skills at a very advanced level, then you can delve in taking this course, mastering the practical requirements of a GRC professional. And by doing this, then you're able to get into the actual hands-on, looking at myriads of scenarios, not to mention various intense labs activities that will help you to develop those skills and more, just to make that known. So let's get back to our case, and here we are required to, as it relates to risk assessments and risk register operations. And what you want to do is, for this, in relation to cloud migration risk assessment, and I've also developed an entire course looking at this as well that you want to possibly check out. So step one is to define the risk scenario, write the risk statement, looking at the scoring in terms of likelihood and impact, calculate risk, score, identify various treatment options for risk, update our risk register, review our dashboard, and then present to the board. So these are the basic objectives. So let us go right into our risk register, and this is a typical risk register at the very simple basic level. But before we actually delve to this point, what we want to do is to establish, as was the scenario context. So let me quickly add this information here. And what I'll be doing from this is won't be anything that is deemed perfect. So I'm just going to be adding this here. You will also have access to this resource just to get some context here. So the first thing is our risk statement, going back to our cloud migration. So the scenario is that the organization migrating critical financial and customer data from on-prem to cloud, example AWS or Azure. That's the risk statement. And there are a number of risk statements. For example, in this case, you have the risk ID. Depending on the risk ID, then you have the particular statement. So these are various risk statements in the organization that you could have developed. And with the risk statement, we also need, that's the risk context. So in addition to the risk context, we also need a risk statement. Let me also add this to our sheet as well. So I have that, and I could also place this on our sheet. So we have our risk statement, we have our risk scenario or risk statement, and the risk statement says that there is a risk that misconfigured cloud resources and inadequate access controls during cloud migration may lead to unauthorized access. Data leakage and regulatory non-compliance resulted in financial loss, reputational damage, and legal penalties. So oftentimes you're required to state what the risk is and also to place that within a particular scenario or particular context. And that is what we're documenting here. Assigning an ID, documenting our risk, and of course, looking at the likelihood of these risks happening, the impact, or we derive our score, whether or not these are critical, high, depending on the decision of the organization, knowing that you have qualitative risk assessment and you have quantitative risk assessment. And also looking at the treatment, who owns the risk and the status of the risk. Awesome. So once we have all of that established, it comes down to your risk scoring. And in many instances, your risk scoring can be built, for example, using a simple matrix. In this case, a 5x5 matrix, where you have the factor, you have your score, you have your various justifications. So let me also add this to our page just to give you an idea of what your risk scoring matrix can look like in reality. So this has to do with your risk scoring. So when developing your risk scoring, then this is how you would actually establish this. So for risk scoring, let me just get over this side. So for risk scoring, then a simple 5x5 matrix. And with this, you have the factors, and this is the likelihood of impact, which are listed here on your risk register sheet. Right? So you have the factors, the likelihood, the impact, and then you have the scores. And in many cases, this is one of the most common methods in terms of assigning scores. This is where you would sit with the organization, the leaders within the various departments, and to assign a number in terms of rating. What's considered high risk, what's considered a low risk, likelihood, impact, and then you would assign those numbers. And of course, a justification here would say that what would deem the likelihood for a high score in this case. And it says that code misconfigurations are among the top causes of breaches. So this would be deemed a very high situation in terms of this occurring. The level of impact this would have on the organization, critical. This could lead to financial data plus regulatory exposure for this particular organization. So this method that is used for scoring risk is pretty much straightforward. And there's also one that's far more advanced, which is FAIR, and that is normally the quantitative risk assessment, which involves far more advanced calculations and having more data to work with. So that is something. So you have qualitative, you have quantitative methods of risk assessment when it comes on to your managing your risk register. Awesome. So the next aspect has to do with your risk scoring calculation. So risk scoring calculation is normally done by calculating your risk likelihood times your risk impact. So in this case, this could be, this 20 would be a, let's say, or likelihood times, I'm just doing this very, as they would say, rough and dirty in all of this. So let's just get back here. And that would be 20. So your likelihood times the impact would give you that overall risk scoring. And we could also filter this formula here as well. Awesome. And in this case, once we have this score of 20, this would equal to critical or high priority, which requires immediate execution. And this is being done at the simplest level. So these are the various risk levels. And you could also apply formulas in terms of determining all of these. What is critical, but we're just keeping things as simple for you to get those basic ideas. And of course, as I've mentioned, I will always reiterate, you can always explore the more advanced components or courses that I've developed that deep dives into all of these elements that we're going to be looking at. Great. And then, of course, there are various treatment methods that you can actually use. So you have quite a number of options. You can mitigate the risk. You can transfer the risk. You can avoid the risk. You can also accept the risk. And risk treatment goes back to the owners of the risk at the end of the day. Awesome. So the great thing for you is to be able to present what those risks are. Senior management decides what the risk appetite of the organization is as it relates to each of those elements. So let's say if we go back looking at the original, so let's look back at our original, in this case, right, the risk statement. So we have a risk statement, we score, proposed treatment options. All right, so as it relates to those proposed treatment options, which I've highlighted earlier, you can decide to mitigate. Now let us have an understanding of each of these, what is involved. So in the case of, let's say, option 1, which is risk mitigation, then a number of controls could have been implemented to address this. Strong IAM governance, we have multi-factor, we have cloud, we have continuous monitoring, we have data encryption, we have security posture. These are a number of different things that could have been done to address this particular risk in terms of control measures. In addressing these risk scenarios, you could also transfer the risk where you will implement cyber insurance coverage for cloud incidents or third-party shared responsibilities. And by doing this, you're reducing financial impact, not the likelihood. If you decided to go to risk option number 3, which is risk avoidance, then you delay migration or highly sensitive workloads. And really practical, as this normally conflicts with business objectives. Or you could decide to move to risk option number 4, which is risk acceptance, which is accept minor residual risk after controls are implemented and must be approved by senior leadership. So that's very important. So going back, let us ensure that we're on track. So we look at the calculations, look at the likelihood, we have our statement. We are familiar with identifying our treatment options, and we could then make necessary adjustments to our risk register, review our dashboard, and of course, present this to management. So in a very simple scenario, this is how you go about documenting your risk. Establishing a risk statement, your likelihood, what the impact is, your score, your risk levels, your treatment, understand what these treatment options could be, who owns the risk, and of course, tracking and monitoring the changes and updates that are made to these various risks. And a simple risk register, things can be far more advanced than what you're looking at, but a simple risk register that could be presented to the board could be the top risk in terms of your scores, and simply having all of this being presented in terms of higher risk, lower risk, their impact, the score, and what actions the organization needs to take to address these risks. So in a nutshell, that actually covers our very first aspect. Now, in addition to this, you will be presented with these additional documentations associated with this case scenario that can be far more advanced. Now, let me give a very good template example for this that I want you to explore. So all of these resources, I want you to take these and I want you to explore these. So here I've developed all of this in terms of migration risk. I have my instructor version. We have a detailed number of risks, the likelihood impact. All of these are there, the calculations. I also have a student version that you can also experiment with. It's an advanced dashboard looking at formulas, the matrix, the various risks, the domain, the owners. This is a very beautiful dashboard that you can also experiment with and to present to management. You have your review calendar as well, looking at the various risks, what they are, the impact on the organization as it relates to monitoring risk. So in the next segment, we are going to be looking at skill number 2, which is control mapping and control library management.